Hi, this is Mike Young with Noble Warriors. You're about to hear a seminar titled Engage, Equip, Encourage, Leading Noble Men, presented by Mike Young, Executive Director of Noble Warriors in Richmond, Virginia. This challenge was presented at the Iron Sharpens Iron Men's Conference in Richmond, Virginia on April 9, 2011. My prayer is that this message will encourage you in your walk with Christ and better equip you to lead your family. I am glad you're here. You're having a blessed day so far and getting something out of this. I know we went overtime a little bit, but singing Holy, Holy, Holy and just hearing men's voices is so powerful. Just blesses me. Hey, let me very quickly, you guys know I'm Mike Young, Noble Warriors, but I'd like to just very quickly, we don't have time for long introductions. Let me hear where you're from. I know I got some of my guys from Ahoskie, North Carolina here. All right? That's awesome. And where are you from? Wow. Oh, that's right. You and I have emailed back and forth. Drew, good to meet you, friend. Appreciate you being here. Midlothian? Yorktown. With Bethel? Ashland? Okay, with the Rock? Verona, okay. Richmond? Wait, Grove here? Mechanicsville Christian Center, excellent. Crew Baptist, awesome. Culpeper. Midlothian, Caroline County, Newport News. Okay, wow. Tidewater and Hampton Roads all recognized here. Okay, Chesterfield, Midlothian, good. Okay, so we got a couple more Bethel guys. I know this guy. Lindale right there in outside of Chesterfield. Yeah. Midlothian and right around here. Okay, excellent. We got a couple more guys coming in. Here's my buddy Silas Booker coming in from Petersburg. And I got something that I left over here. Well, guys, let me start with prayer, and then we're going to talk a little bit about men's ministry and have some fun with that. So let me pray. Father, I am thankful that these men are here, and they're in this particular seminar because they are concerned not only about their own spiritual health, but, Father, about the spiritual health of the other men in the church. And I just thank you and praise you that you have placed a burden on some of our hearts to be not only concerned of ourselves, but concerned with our brothers, and to give us a desire to want to see other men grow in Christ and lead their families. So, Father, as we engage this conversation today, I pray that it will honor you, that you will use me as an instrument, and that these men will leave here with biblically based ideas and sound strategies to take back to their churches to help build men. And so, God, we just give this time to you. We thank you for what you've already done, and we are eager with anticipation for what you will do in the next hour or so. And we lift all this up in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys. I called this Engage, Equip, and Encourage. Reach and build men in your church and beyond. Now, I'm going to start with a couple of stories here. When I was in scouting, my scoutmaster's methodology for teaching a new scout how to set up a tent was to toss the tent to him and tell him to set it up. And then just laugh at him kind of as he fumbled through trying to figure out how to set up a tent. And if you take a kid that's never done anything like that, how does that feel to them? It's awkward, it's intimidating, and it's uncomfortable. How many of you know someone, and maybe even you, who was taught to swim by tossing them off the dock? Any of you? Yeah, is that, there are people who brag about that, but is that a good teaching method? No, it really isn't, is it? Because you end up being resentful and afraid of when is the next time a guy's going to pick me up and toss me off the dock. Yeah, I mean, you're going to do something there. But here's the deal. Engage, equip, and encourage, I think, is just good teaching methodology, and it follows through what I'm doing here. I am fortunate in that my dad didn't have an awful lot of formal education, but he understood how to teach. And it's kind of interesting because my dad, he couldn't recite the scout law to save his life. But he was a scout leader that taught young men how to set up tents and do scouting skills by this methodology. He would take the tent out. He would get the guy interested. You know, a young kid coming into scouting wants to go camping. I mean, that's why everybody signs up. They want to go camping, they want to be outdoors. So he would get the guy interested in what he had to offer, and then he would get beside him and show him how to set the tent up. He would get him interested, he would get with him, he would help him, he would explain things, he would show him what he was doing that was wrong and help him get over that hump. And then he'd make the young guy take the tent down, fold it back up, put it in the bag, and then do it by himself. And then as he did it by himself, he would offer offer encouragement, and he would cheer for him. And I think that's just good strategy, regardless of what we're doing. I think we need to get people's attention. And quite honestly, men are hurting. And men have needs that they may not be able to articulate. Just like Rod was talking this morning, there are guys who are angry and they really can't put their finger on it, but they know they need some help. Would you agree with that? And I'll tell you something else. I think so often when we talk with men, and I know I've got a couple of pastors in here, some other leaders, but I think so often what we offer to folks is theology that a guy can't reach up and grab and he doesn't know what to do with it. Are you with me there? As a matter of fact, my personal deal when I teach a Bible fellowship class at my church, and I'll be leading Bible fellowship tomorrow morning, the statement that I often say to folks is, now we got to get down to the kitchen table level. Because if I lead my class in a lesson and a guy walks out of there and he doesn't have any idea how to take that home and reteach it or share that information with his family at the kitchen table, have I done him any good? No, I really haven't. So we've got to be very practical with what we do for men. We need to get their attention, we need to engage them, but then we need to equip them with very practical stuff. Now, theology and theory is okay. I'm not knocking that. I see the value of it. But if we can't figure out how to apply it with the 10-year-old and 12-year-old knuckleheads that sit at my table, then I haven't helped him much. And then here's the other thing. How many of you played sports at some point in your life? Most all of us have been involved in some. And for many men, the last time anyone really cheered for them was when they played high school sports. Now, you think about that. And so one of the things that I think is missing with men, oh boy, that's way too big. One of the things I think is missing with men is we forget to cheer for the guys who are setting a good example and trying to get it right. We're always moving toward the negative, and I'll give you an example of that. We got 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. All 3 of the boys were playing basketball this winter. And I would go to basketball games, and what do you hear? If a kid misses a basket, do you think he knows that he missed a basket? Yeah, I mean, it's not like he didn't see that the ball didn't go in the hoop. I mean, he knows. But there's some parents that just feel like they have to berate kids, and all they do is hound on the negatives. And I even wrote an article about this, and I said, when I'm at a basketball game, I want my voice to cheer loudest and longest for my kid. I want my child to understand that I am with him, encouraging him. There's a time for coaching and saying, hey, if you had done this, you would have gotten a clear shot at the basket. You follow what I'm saying? But I think men are starving for encouragement. And I think we need to celebrate when guys are getting things right. And we're missing the boat on that. Does that make sense? And so we need that. Now, here's, let's see. I don't know. Hopefully everything is... Now, you're going to have to bear with me here for just a moment. I got to make a sound. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe they already had it all set up. Make a sound adjustment here. How many of you remember the BASF commercials? You remember those? Let me see if this is going to play for us here.
At BASF, we don't make a boat, we make it faster. We don't make the safety seat, we make it more comfortable. We don't make the studio, we make it quieter. We don't make the golf clubs, we make them more powerful. At BASF, we don't make a lot of the products you buy, we make a lot of the products you buy better. BASF.
It's a powerful golf club, wasn't it? Now, let me tell you the metaphor here. A lot of folks say, well, we want noble warriors at our church. We want to do noble warriors. Well, listen, noble warriors, I explain to folks, is a lot like BASF. We're not your men's ministry. I don't want noble warriors to run your men's ministry, do your Bible studies, be your your men's ministry. What we want to do is make your men's ministry better. And so we stand as a servant to the local church. And I tell you, pastors, a lot of pastors have gotten anxious over the years with parachurch ministries because there's often a difficult relationship there. And listen, my whole deal is I just want, when someone in your church gets excited about discipling men and they say, I need an idea or a resource, I want to be able to hand it to them. Not to be there to do it for them, to implement it, but I want to hand it off and just be a blessing and a servant to the local church. As a matter of fact, my dad was a pipe fitter in the shipyards, and he taught me how to be a good helper. A mechanic in a trade always needed a helper. Any of you tradesmen or anything? And if you're a tradesman, then the helper, Dad would never let me, when I was working with him, not be thinking about what he was doing. Because his comment to me was, I never want to have to tell you what I need. You should be tracking with me and thinking with me, and before I even ask for a 24-inch pipe wrench, I want you to have it in my hand because you see where I'm headed next. Does that make sense? And so, as a servant to the local church, I think Noble Warriors, when someone says, wow, we need to do something with pornography, I need to be able to say, boom, here it is. Got it. When you've got an issue with anger or you want to do a study on anger, I want you to be able to say, hey, we need some help with an anger resource, and I want to say, boom, here it is. Mike Mason called our office this week and said, hey, we got a church softball league. We need some 2-minute devotions to help with blessing our softball guys. And so Laurie Harrison sent me a text, and when I got back to the office, I pulled a devotional book about baseball off the shelf and handed it to her. I said, put Mike Mason's name on it. This is the answer to his question. And so that's how we want to be able to serve the local church. Okay? So we want to make your men's ministry better. Now, let's process this. We're going to go through the challenge of dealing with men, the church's response, some effective strategies, and a specific kingdom asset. Now, let's talk about the challenge. How many of you, tell me what's going on with your men? Are all your men hitting the ball out of the park spiritually? Okay, they're not. Okay, so we can agree on that. We got some foundational stuff. What's going on with them? Where do you see the needs? What are your needs with your men? All right, we need them to step up and lead. Excellent. I heard commitment. We need guys to commit. What else do we need? What else do you see? How to be a father and a husband. Excellent. Dave, my buddy came in all the way from Lynchburg. Good to see you, bud. Yes. Yep. And we're feeling more and more tension and more need for that, aren't we? What else are you seeing with your guys? Need a servant's heart. Balance. Yeah, between work and home. As a matter of fact, there's a great book called Choosing to Cheat by Andy Stanley that deals with that specific issue. Yeah. You get? Yeah. Okay, good. So we've hit a number of things here. Now let me tell you a different perspective on this that I think says the same thing. How many of you are familiar with the ministry MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers? Okay? I get invited to speak to a lot of MOPS groups. And quite honestly, most of the time the people who speak to MOPS groups are women, but they find it interesting to bring a guy in to talk about men and raising sons and that sort of thing. And often what I will hear from those young mothers at MOPS groups is, I'm tired and I wish my husband would lead our family. Now, isn't that a profound statement? Because that's what the women in those cases are begging for is God's order in the home. Now, there are some things that the ladies are probably missing out on because they don't necessarily want to lead. They'll say they want it, but they don't really want it sometimes. But when I get with the men and I say, hey, guess what your ladies are telling me? They're telling me they'd like for you to step up and lead, be the spiritual head of the household, and really take some leadership in the home. You know what most of the guys tell me? I feel that tension, I feel that responsibility, but I have no idea what that looks like. I've never seen in my adult experience or in my experience a family done well. Now, some of those guys just really haven't looked around because there are good examples out there, but in so many young men's lives, they don't have a good example of what a godly home looks like, and so they're lost. So then we go back to this mentoring question. You know, there is real need out there that the church could be answering. As a matter of fact, I have something interesting to share with you. You mentioned fathering specifically, and there's an organization called the National Fatherhood Initiative that did a study called Mama Says, a national study of women's attitudes, mothers' attitudes on fathering, scientific research. And in the executive summary, here's one of the points that they made. Now listen to this. When asked to rate the importance of 6 possible places that might help fathers be better dads, the respondents as a whole placed the most importance on churches and other communities of faith, followed closely by schools, then by community-based organizations. The highest rating of very important was given frequently to churches, even by those respondents who said they were not at all religious and not very religious. So what that says to me is that even the secular world understands that it needs help with how to be godly men, how to raise godly families, and they think they can get help from the church. But if I had all your church's phone numbers and I were to call on Monday morning and say, my name is Mike Young, I'm a dad, I was at a conference this weekend, I want to be a better father, what can you do to help me? The sound on the other end would be silence. Yeah. And I got to tell you, in many cases, the pastors may not know exactly what to say. And I'm not knocking the pastors, a lot of stuff going on, but I'm saying that the church, even secular society, believes the church has help that they need. And so we've got to find a way to help them understand that we do want to help them and then deliver some resources to them. So that's part of the challenge. Men are in trouble. You know, there are books out there now called Guyland. I don't know if you've read or heard about that. There's a book written by a secular author that talks about adolescence in young men now. This crazy period of not being grown up is extending now to like 30 years old. You know there are guys who are flunking out of college because they're addicted to video games, among other things. We are not inviting our men to step up, and it's killing us. Secular society recognizes that. The church knows, but has not been able to make a difference. And listen, some of you guys are in here and you're concerned about the men in your church and you're desperately looking for some solutions because some of the things you've done in the past haven't worked very well. So let me ask you this. What are some things that you have done or are doing at your church as part of your men's ministry strategy? Let's talk about what you're doing currently. Okay, men's fraternity. And I got to tell you, he come out of the gate strong. I don't think there's anything better out there. Okay? But what are some other things? Okay, a men's class on marriage. What else? Yep. Yeah. Now, let me camp there for a moment. How many of you have done a men's prayer breakfast or a monthly men's breakfast at your church? Most all of us have. How's that working for you? Yeah, I think what we're seeing across the board is there was a season, probably about 30 or 40 years ago, when that was a new idea and it was really going well. Now, I'm not saying that it can't go well now, but I'm saying that in most of the churches that say, yes, we do a monthly men's breakfast, generally who shows up are what I call the seasoned men. Now, that's a great term to use for guys who've got a little mileage on their tires. And those guys have disposable time and disposable income, and they gather, they love it, they have a great time, but they are often not engaging the younger set. Are you seeing that? And so your group is dwindled, okay? There's some places where it's still working well, but I think that's something that, it doesn't always work effectively right now because of the way schedules are going for young families. And I'm not saying I like those schedules, but it's the reality of where we are. Okay, so we've done men's breakfast. What else? What's something else you've done? What? What's Celebrate Recovery? Okay, so we're dealing with addictions and that sort of thing. Lifestyle, hurts. What is it? Hurts, habits? Yeah, okay. So Celebrate Recovery, yes.
Just bringing the men in and letting them know what the Word of God calls men to be.
Okay.
What is expected of them as a man.
Right, so we need to speak to them as men. We need to speak to them as men. And I got to tell you, there are lots of pastors who think they are adequately discipling their men from the pulpit on Sunday morning. But I don't see that being 100% effective most of the time. we need to have men's-only events because there are some things that need to be said to men that are, quite honestly, not going to be said in a mixed organization. As a matter of fact, MCC, Mechanicsville Christian Center, is running a sermon series right now called Manland. And at the end of the service, the pastor sends the women out. In the last 10 minutes, he goes man-to-man with the guys in the church. Cool model. And so to speak to men, and that's critical. A couple of other things. We mentioned softball. How many of you have got a men's softball team or you've had men's sports teams? You know, so some of that happens. How about fishing trip? Any of you done fishing trip? None of that sort of thing. Yep. Absolutely. You got to find what their niche is. How many of you have done a golf outing of some sort? Yeah, you can do all those things. As a matter of fact, I set up on this, and you can't see this very clearly, but there's no need to necessarily write this down, but I set up a hypothetical church men's ministry calendar here. And let's just say this is, okay, you might have a men's breakfast, so that's in yellow. You might even go to an Iron Sharpens Iron men's conference like you guys are today. There's some churches here that have groups of guys. You might go to and I've just pulled this out of the air. We're in Richmond. You might have men's night at the Squirrels at the Diamond. You might go to a baseball game. You might go to a wild game dinner, okay? And this one says service projects because we all, the men get called on to put the mulch out in the springtime. So all of those are men's ministry things that are, in and of themselves, they can be pretty good. Sometimes we have a lot of spiritual content like we would at Iron Sharpens Iron. Sometimes we don't have that much. You may not even get a devotion in. It may just be completely a time of fellowship. Are men going to come to these? Yeah, some of them will. But what's missing from this? Here's the question. Is this an effective disciple-making strategy for the local church? These are events. What? It can be to build relationships. That's right. Now, so here's where we're going to go. Is this effective disciple-making? I would say no, but it can be part of effective disciple-making. Because here's what my thinking is, and this is what I want to see churches doing. Each one of these needs to point men to a logical next step. We need to be thinking with everything that we do related to men, how can we help him take another step toward being a godly man, leading a godly family, and raising a godly next generation? And we're not going to do that if the men's breakfast stands all by itself and the only thing you do for a month is plan to come back for the next men's breakfast. Are you following what I'm saying? I love it when Vody Bacham says on a CD I've got of his, "Are you smelling what I'm stepping in?" So that's a good one, isn't it? So, we need to have some sort of discipleship strategy. Men-specific events should feed into an ongoing discipling strategy. So at each one of these events, we should be looking for a way to invite a guy into something that will take him deeper. Now, I'm going to unpack this just a little bit with some things here. Let's talk about purpose and plan. Here's a question. How big is your men's ministry? How big is the men's ministry at your church? Excellent. He's a trained man. Huh? Every man that walks through the door. Some of you have been through some not men's fraternity, but man in the mirror training. And the bottom line is, Patrick Morley says that your men's ministry is as big as every man in your church. And I would dare say even the young men. Because my 10-year-old son who was sitting with me on the front pew this morning is part of the men's ministry. Because if we're not casting vision for him of what it means to be a godly man that's going to have a godly marriage and raise a godly next generation, then we are doing him a disservice. So your men's ministry needs to be as big as every man in your church. And when you look at those guys, you need to be thinking, wow, how can we involve them in discipleship? Now that's a daunting challenge, isn't it? Let me show you something. I'm gonna do a crazy thing here. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Hey, will you come up here, Ricky? Show you an interesting thing here. Kind of hold that out wide, both sides. Yep, like that. I want to hold it flat. I have a blanket that I normally do this with, but I left it. So we're going to hold this like this. Now, very often we end up with a men's ministry that wants to catch every man in the church. And if we aren't careful, we'll catch every man in the church. Stretch it on out. Let's try to hold it flat. Pull your arms out. There you go. We'll end up with a men's ministry in the church that keeps everybody at about the same level, and it's not very deep. You follow what I'm saying? Because I got to tell you, there are men in your church that are there and they're hanging on, but they're not very deep. They're the ones, the Christian men, who will flick the bird that Rod was talking about. Now, that may be a lot of us at times. I don't know. I know I have my moments with anger. But here's part of what we get from some of the stuff with Man in the Mirror, some of the research about men's ministry. We need to find ways to catch men broadly. Now, you hold your arms like you are, just like you were holding up those dictionaries in class when you got in trouble. You remember that? Any of you ever had to hold the dictionaries up when you got in trouble? See? Oh, he told it. Yeah. All right, we need to figure out how in our men's ministry we can take guys from wide to deep. Does that make sense? And so part of our logical next step needs to be, stay where you are, I'm working this, needs to be we need to catch guys in a big net up here, but we need to funnel them down. And as they're going here, what are they doing? They're going deeper in the Word. They are becoming men who are stable in their faith, who are committed to their wives, who are investing in the next generation, and who are ready to be responding to what God's calling them to do. Now, there are times in some churches where everything we do, we want it to be deep. Let's go on a theological retreat. Well, that's a good thing for a few guys, but that's not going to be good for every guy. I've got guys who want to do discipleship for men, and they want every man in the church to do experiencing God. Well, that's wonderful for a few men. But I got to tell you, we've got to work men up to the point where they're ready to do 30 minutes of homework every night for 5 or 6 nights a week. You follow what I'm saying? So we need to take guys from wide to deep. So that's part of, hey, let's give Ricky a great hand here. Just throw it up here. Excellent. Okay. So that's a mental picture you need to have in your mind. How am I catching guys and how am I taking them deep? Okay? Then the next thing I put up here is logical next steps. Well, what does that look like? You know, if a guy is going to come to an event that you do, then what are you going to tell him is the follow-up? And I have not done a great job with this iron sharpens iron deal, but churches that are going to maximize this have already thought about what are we doing next. As a matter of fact, there are some churches like the guys from Lebanon Grove down in Gates County. An immediate follow-up for them will be to stop on the way home tonight and eat dinner together and talk about what they learned. I mean, that's a logical follow-up. And then we say, okay, you know what, guys, how many of you were touched by Rod Harrison's message on anger? No, I'm talking about they could talk about that while they're eating together at Golden Corral or whatever. And you need to go to a trough tonight. I mean, when you go home, you want to eat man food and you want to eat a bunch of it. So go to a buffet. So and that's what I call a trough. And you're talking about what we're going to do next. And it may be a study from Bill Perkins' books, When Godly Men Get Angry. So how are you going to follow up? How are you going to take guys deeper? How are you going to go in the Word with that? So thinking about those things. And listen, Patrick Morley makes this statement that I absolutely love. And that says, evangelism without discipleship is cruel. And I am concerned that we are spending an awful lot of time counting noses in the church and not taking men deep. Now, here's an interesting thing. Folks ask me all the time, well, is iron sharpens iron and noble warriors and what you're doing, is this evangelism or discipleship? Yes. It's evangelism and discipleship. But let me tell you how I think that works out. There are men on the outside of the church looking at the men inside the church that are saying, he's not doing any better than I am. Why do I want any of that? They keep telling me about Jesus, but I don't see it. And we're not living John 10:10. We're not experiencing that abundance in life. And so I believe, and this may just be me, but I believe if we help men understand what it means to walk with Christ and lead a family, leave a godly legacy and walk in that way, then other men are going to be attracted to that, and they're going to say, I want some of what he's got. And so then good discipleship produces evangelism. I also believe that, when I was a kid and I started asking questions about spiritual things to my dad, and this is no criticism of my dad, he did what he knew to do. His next move when I started asking questions that he didn't know the answer to was to do what? Call the preacher. Pastor Hardy, Michael's asking some spiritual questions. I think God's working in his heart, and I'd like for you to come and meet with us and talk with him about salvation. And that's a wonderful thing for my dad to do. He responded. But my prayer, and it's in the manhood plans of some of the men that go through men's fraternity, but my prayer is to see men who would be comfortable and confident in their faith, and that when a child starts asking spiritual questions, he can answer those questions, and he can take a child to the Word, and then he can kneel beside the bed of his child like I've done with mine and pray with them as they receive Christ. Now that's discipleship that produces evangelism. Because if a young man's testimony is that my father prayed with me as Jesus took control of my life, man, do you want to hear that testimony in your churches? It's not going to fall off of a tree. We got to work for it. But that's what we want to see happening. So I go back to, what is Matthew 28:18 through 20 all about? You remember what is that? The Great Commission. And what does it say? We want to make great, go ye therefore into all nations and make disciples. Yeah, choir members. You guys were at the Morley thing. It's not about spread mulch. It's about making disciples, and that's what we need to be doing. So we need to do that with men, because listen, now I'm going to hit some sacred cows here, but you're all guys, you'll understand this. Listen, we spend an awful lot of energy and time and money on children's ministry, youth ministry, and women's ministry. And it's my belief that the only way that we're going to change children and women and men, children and youth and women, and the family, is to strengthen the man. Now, I know that gets me sideways with some folks at times. And I often tell, when I speak to groups of ladies, I say the best advocate for men's ministry in the local church, who should it be? Who should be the strongest advocate? The women. I tell women all the time, you need to be at the pastor's door, trip him, and then ask him how he's going to help your husband. Now, I'm sorry. I don't. No. But
I'll say something in concert with that. We serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not Sarah, Rachel, and Rebecca.
That's interesting. Yep. And I look at how Jesus Christ ministered to the culture. And he shocked everyone by the way he treated women and by the way he treated children. They didn't know what to do with him. But how did he build the church that you and I are part of today? He invested in men. And one of the 12 was a dud. And of that 12, there were 3. Who were they? Peter, James, and John. And then in that circle, there was one that really got an awful lot of Jesus' attention according to Scripture. And who was that? Peter. Now let me tell you my theory on Peter. And I've never been to seminary. I'm not ordained, so you guys can correct me. But here's my thinking about Peter. How many of you have ever been in a boat? You've been in a little motorboat. Have any of you ever tried to steer a boat that didn't have the motor turned on? Can you do it? No. What happens? What happens to the boat? It either stays where it is, or the wind or the current takes it where it wants to go. But if a boat is moving, if it's got thrust coming out of the back, what can you do with it? You can steer it. Well, here's my theory. It didn't make any difference what was happening. Peter was moving. Peter was like my boys, he's all afterburner and no rudder. And so they just go with great energy, and Peter had enthusiasm, and he was excited, and he was fearless, and he was going to move, but he needed to be directed. But he could be directed because he was moving. And the guys that don't move, you can't direct. So sooner or later, you've got to light a fire under somebody's rear end and get them to move so that you can steer them. Does that make sense? So, am I getting in trouble?
Oh, no. We're in agreement.
Okay. All right, making disciples. So here we go. All right, what I did with this, I just said in this green section here, I call this ongoing discipleship that is meaningful, practical, and transforming. That's what we've got to have. We've got to have something that fills in the gaps between these events. And then, what do you think this little arrow is all about? Exactly. Every time you have an event, there should be a call, an invitation into this ongoing discipleship. David mentioned men's fraternity. And men's fraternity is designed so that it's a week to week to week to week thing. Now, if a guy comes in at week 10, he will be blessed on week 10 and every week thereafter. And so men's fraternity is a strategy that is ongoing, and it builds, but you can also jump into any time. And so what I'm challenging you guys to think through is, what can we do at our church? How can we get an ongoing discipleship strategy in place that we can link all these things together? Now, notice, when you first get started with this, does every man in the church participate? No. No, it grows. It grows step by step, bit by bit. Now, this is one of the things that just drives men's ministry leaders crazy, is because you go into all this energy and you plan an event, and listen, your pain is no greater than mine, because I don't know what you do or how much you spend or how much energy, but I can tell you 525 guys here is a huge blessing, but for the energy and time and money that we've spent to put this on, it would be much more exciting to me to have 3,000 guys here. Yeah, well, we'll talk about that later. But here's the deal. You've got to be willing to take what God gives you, celebrate that, build on them, because then those guys become your greatest advocates to the other guys. Are you following what I'm saying? You can't expect to get it all. I have guys who plan stuff like I got a guy who loves to fish. Well, let's take golf, because golf, I think, is even a better example. Guy who loves to play golf, and so he wants to plan a golf outing for the guys in the church. And let's just pick a number out of the air. Let's say there are 100 adult men in the church. Well, that guy, because he loves golf and loves God, he plans this golf outing, and he expects that 100 men are going to come out and play golf and celebrate God. Well, he's got a number of problems in front of him that he is completely blind to. All right, let's start rattling them off. What's one of his problems? Yeah, not everybody plays golf, and I'm in the mix, and sometimes the pastor's in the mix. And then he's very upset because the pastor doesn't want to go play golf. Well, the pastor doesn't play golf, so why are you inviting him out there? And so we set expectations that are just never going to get met. What's another problem with what he's doing? Schedule. Everybody's busy. What's another problem with what he's doing? Cost. Weather. I mean, there could be any number of things. So this guy plans this event. He's expecting 100 guys, and 10 guys actually agree to do it. So he's heartbroken and disappointed, and he throws up his hands and said, the men here aren't interested in anything. Well, he needs to recalibrate and understand that there are only a handful of guys interested in golf, have the time, and have the money to go and participate in this thing. And quite honestly, they may not be the ones that he needs to be ministering to. You following me? So sometimes we got to recalibrate what we're doing, and we got to think about how are we going to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And sometimes we have to very carefully and gently let this brother down and say, you know what, I know you love golf, and why don't you get 4 or 5 guys together and you guys go play golf and do a devotional, but this is not a men's event that we're going to promote in our church because it's not going to have the bandwidth. You follow what I'm saying? So, okay, now, is this enough? Are we there yet? Are we finished? No. Why not? Okay, you guys are good. What are we missing? We're missing the word, okay? What? Okay, we're missing the word. We really, I mean, this can have a lot of gospel context to it. We haven't got the food. Who's bringing the baked beans? So you could be missing the pastor. Yeah. What else do you see you're missing here? Reproduction. Excellent. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, you guys are good. You're setting me up. I just want you to know that. This is all planned. Okay? Here's what I think we're missing. And I just wrote down, you see I got this little red section here, and I call this mature disciples who sharpen each other and invest in others. You follow me there? Because even if we get this discipleship group going, even if we've got a men's fraternity ministry at our church that's kicking tail, that does not answer the whole question. And it misses it for this reason, I think. For Proverbs 27:17, and the name for this conference, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Because this is still more of a large group, or it can be. And listen, even if it's small group stuff, even if it's only 6 guys going through a study together, are those guys, can they know enough about each other and go deep enough to really hold each other accountable? They can. But I think what really happens is I can't have but so many relationships. So I've got a couple of guys on Friday mornings that I meet with. And I know what's going on in their lives, and they know what's going on in my life. And so we can ask each other, did you take your wife out on a date this week? How are your kids doing? I know your son was trying out for the basketball team. How's he doing? Did he make it? I can get a text from one of these brothers that says he's going to find out this afternoon whether or not he made it or he got cut. Would you pray for him? I got a text yesterday, an email yesterday from another guy that I'm in relationship with that said, I've been offered a new job that I've accepted, and I'm going in at 4:30 to tender my resignation where I am now. If you have a moment, would you pray that I would handle that well? And so, guys, I think we've got to get to the point. I believe men need 3 key things. They need to be connected to Jesus Christ. They need to be in the Word. And they need to be connected to other men. And so it's here, it's in this part that starts even slower and is harder to build, that the real work takes place that really needs to take place. Does that make sense? So, and this is a slow process. Some of you who've done some stuff with Man in the Mirror, Patrick Morley says that in order to develop a fully functional, sustainable men's ministry in the local church, how long do you think it takes? What? 10 years. Now, I get frustrated at Wendy's if they don't have my Frosty ready by the time I get around the building. And so we live in a world and an environment where we're expecting things to happen so quickly that 10 years just drives us crazy. But I got to tell you, men, we've got to have that sort of long-range view. And listen, I'm going to say some things that, I always wonder who I might offend, but I'll just say it anyway. There's some guys in here who've got some miles on you that, the best 10 years of your life could be investing in a couple of men in a very intentional and strategic way. I mean, your legacy could begin now by investing in some young men. And that's huge. And so that's where we've got to get. This could be young men, it could be old men, it could be mentoring, could be all sorts of things, but this is where we've got to go. Now, this begs another question as far as I'm concerned that I've had discussions about with guys across the country, quite honestly. If we say we're going to make disciples, what does a disciple look like? Yeah, looks like us. But how do we define it? I mean, we live in a world where the business world always wants to know what's your mission statement, what's your vision statement, what are your goals, what are your objectives, how are you getting there? So what if someone says, well, you're going to make me into a disciple, what is that going to look like? Okay? Yeah, we could talk about that and we could have the same discussion that I've had, but let me offer this to you. How many of you know what's in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1? It's the qualifications of elders and deacons. You there? How many of you grew up in the Baptist? Well, I'm not going to do that. I grew up in the Baptist church. And for the most part in my lifetime, the only time that I heard anyone mention 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 was when it was time to ordain and nominate and get deacons. And I got to tell you, to my dismay, what I saw, let me find a non-Baptist, well, I'll do it with a Baptist. What I saw was folks take the list of that qualifications of elders and deacons, and they would hold it up to Johnny, and they would go down this list, And what were they looking for? That's exactly right. They were looking for, where is he disqualified? Have you seen that in the church? We use this piece of sacred text, in my opinion, too often from what I've seen, to beat people up. Does that make sense? And so what I would love to see is for us to take this very powerful description of what church leaders should look like and set that as our goal for how we build men up. Now, part of the reason I have to do that is because everybody's got a different opinion about what some of these things mean. And all I have to say is this: the husband of but one wife. And I don't want to get into any theological discussion or anything about that, but I can tell you that I have almost seen brawls in churches over whether or not someone who's been divorced could serve, or a single man. So let me just, I don't want to get into that, but I'm telling you that everybody interprets that differently. So what I'm laying in front of you is your church's interpretation, whatever it is, needs to help build men up to this, not beat men up with this. You follow what I'm saying? And so what I would propose to you, and I've got it, this is from the ESV. What I've got here is the qualifications of elders and deacons from 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, all listed out. Now, you can do that yourself. I just did it for the sake of doing it, and I gave all of them away. Somebody give me one as it comes around, please. That's how scatterbrained. You know, I get so excited about it. Can you tell I get excited about what God's got me doing? It's very fun. So if you look down that list and you would say, listen, if a pastor were to take the pulpit every Sunday morning and know that the men's ministry leadership in his church had worked out a strategy and created a plan that was very clearly articulated so that a man could walk through the door of that church and in very short order know what the pathway was to get to these qualifications because the church was trying to help him get there, how would that feel from the pulpit? I think it would be exciting for a pastor to know that my men are growing and I know exactly what they're growing into. Pastor, does that make sense? And so I don't have a specified program for you, but as you look down that list, you know, above reproach, self-controlled, sober-minded, husband of one wife, you know, some of those are integrity issues. Now, I can't tell you there's a great Bible study out there. There's a book on how to build integrity in the godly man. Because what is that? That's the Word. So we need guys in the Word. Now, but I had a guy yesterday, because I gave this presentation yesterday down in Newport News. I asked, how do we teach that? How do we teach men to be above reproach? And one of the seasoned men in the room said, you model it for them. Wow. I was so excited to hear that because we need to be somehow, not for their glory, but for God's glory, we need to celebrate the men who have lived lives of integrity in front of other men. And we need to bless them, and we need to be asking them, will you mentor another man? Will you lead a Bible study at some point? Or will you come in and for 6 weeks talk with us about how hard it is to make business decisions in this economic time and not compromise your faith? You know, so we could ask guys to do that. The husband of but one wife, I'm going to say one thing on this, and that is that I think this business of the husband of but one wife, if we're not addressing the pornography issue, then we are not helping a man be the husband of but one wife. Because there are plenty of upstanding men leading the church that have only got one wife that they've been married to, but they got bunches of other wives on the internet. Because as far as I understand it, and I haven't not been to seminary, but I think it's pretty clear, if a man looks lustfully after another woman, he has already committed adultery in his life. How many women does he have then? And so there are some things that we need to tighten up somehow, and we need to help men. And so how are we going to get there? So I would just encourage you to look down this list as an exercise. As a matter of fact, anticipating your desire for this, and I'm going to hold one right now. As a former teacher, I anticipated that you guys would want some sort of structure to help with this, And a good way to remember it, so here's what I think the men's discipleship plan in your church should look like. It's as simple as 3 numbers and 1 letter. 1T3 stands for what? 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1. Now, you guys have already mentioned multiplication or reproducibility. Guess what this stands for? 2 Timothy 2:2, that where Paul tells Timothy, the things that you have seen me teach in the presence of others, now you teach also in the presence of godly men who will then teach other men. That's all about reproduction. So, I would encourage you, for your church, 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, review those qualifications and pray over, God, how can our church build men to these qualifications? Does that mean that every man in your church is going to serve as an elder or a deacon? No, but I got to tell you, it would make your pool deeper and broader if we start building men for that. Does that make sense? And so, now, let me unpack a couple of things here, because I put quality. So if the quality here is, let's look down here, and let's say not quarrelsome. So we can not given to much anger. You can pull several of those out of there that have to do with temperament. So you might say, we want to help men with temperament issues, and so once every 3 years, we're going to do a study on anger. And the reason I use 3 years is I think 3 years is a good cycle. And so if a church were to say, okay, every 3 years, we're going to make sure that a guy has an opportunity to get some instruction on every one of these things. You follow what I'm saying? And for marriage, you know, a guy who is a husband of but one wife, you know, I think that speaks to the fact that we want to invest in marriage. You can do that a multitude of ways. There's a new product called, oh my goodness, Oneness, put out by Family Life, and I can't remember it right now. It's Marriage Oneness. Great video-driven study. And listen, just because the men's ministry is thinking about this, does it mean it's got to be the men's ministry that does the presentation? No. Could be the couples ministry. Could be marriage ministry. But you need to be telling guys, at least every 3 years, I expect you to be doing something intentional that's going to help you understand biblically what it means to be the husband of but one wife. Is that a fair thing? And I think also one of the things you could put on there for guys is, hey, at least once every 3 years, you need to go on a marriage retreat with your wife. You need to go to Weekend to Remember. You need to go to the Ridgecrest retreat. You need to go do something. You know, I think that's a fair thing for us to put out there to guys. Listen, guys are looking, part of what's going on with men in the church is that there's no real bar for us to climb up to. It's almost too easy in our culture to be a believer or to call on the name of Christ. And one of the things that's in your bag is a picture of a kid with a muddy face on the front of a magazine. That's my 15-year-old son. We were in Bangladesh last summer, and we were in a place where calling out the name of Christ and professing His name costs something. And so we need to challenge men to step up. If you're going to do this, then you need to be willing to invest in it. So I just created this little worksheet that says, hey, put a strategy down here and think about how could we help guys with this? Able to teach. You know, that's one that we steer around a lot because we think, well, that means only Sunday school teachers could be leaders in the church. I know there's some people who think that way. Do you think any man should get a pass on being able to teach? No. There are plenty of guys who would take the zero on that and say, that's not how God made me, but I believe God's plan is that a man should teach his family what it means to follow God and to live for Him. 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says, follow me as I follow the example of Christ, and I believe that should be every man's prayer, to seek to do that. And so that means teaching. Boy, and I love the idea of how do we teach men to teach God's truth to their children? Boy, if you empower men, and I didn't bring it down here, I forgot. Make sure when you go upstairs you see the manger. How many of you have seen the mangers? The manger is something that we started at our family several years ago. When the kids were little, I wanted to keep Christ in front of the Christmas, and so we started every year at Christmas time going out in the garage and building a life-size manger with the kids. We put it in front of the Christmas tree, so in front of the presents, in front of the tree, is a manger to remind us of Christ. Now, so we do that. We've go to buildamanger.org. We try to help churches sponsor a manger build where dads build mangers with their kids, but it's not just a craft project. Here's what we do. We give dad a toolbox full of tools, and really what it is ideas. And as soon as I tell you this, you'll understand it. If you've got kids or grandkids, then you know one of the things they love to hear is the story of their birth. Even my boys at 10, 11, 15, they love to see their baby book. Who was there when I was born, Daddy? Tell me that story. And so for a dad to have a manger in front of the Christmas tree and to say, sweetheart, go get your Hannah, she's 6, go get your baby book. Let's talk about when you were born. And to review the circumstances of her birth and kind of celebrate that and have some fun with it, but then say, let me tell you the greatest birth story ever. It doesn't make any difference if you told it 100 times or if you've read it or if they've heard it. The fact that Dad would sit there and read Luke 2 to a kid is teaching them to value Christ at Christmas time. And all we're doing is teaching a man how to teach his family. Are you with me? Stewardship training. I think we need to expect that men are going to be involved in Dave Ramsey or Crown or something, because this says manage your household well. I think we need to expect that men are going to be involved in some sort of parenting instruction. Because listen, it does not, we're still figuring a bunch of stuff out with our kids. And so I think to put this out there for guys and say, hey, this is what we are at this church. Whatever this church is, we're growing men to meet these qualifications, and here's how we're going to do it. Now, that's a bold statement, but could that change your church? I talked to a pastor this week who was on sabbatical last fall, and he said God kept coming to me and saying, that's not how he said it. What kept coming to me in my prayer and Bible study time was, if you move the men, you'll move the church. And so he has come out of the gate with a vengeance to disciple men at his church. If you move the men, you'll move the church. I love that. Does it work if you say if you move the children, you'll move the church? Only slightly. If you move the women, you'll move the church. If all the women have been through Beth Moore, we'll have better families. Is it going to work that way? Honestly, it's not. I mean, I feel like I've got a monopoly on ideas here but it was Jesus' idea. It's investing in the men that makes a difference. Now, I need to switch gears because there's something exciting that's coming up. How many of you saw the movie Fireproof? And you guys, you got the inside skinny on this. How many of you seen, you heard about Courageous? Oh, let's see. I got to figure this out now. There we go. If you've heard of Courageous, Courageous is the next film coming out from Sherwood Pictures, and it is about really where Fireproof spoke to the issue of marriage, Courageous speaks to the issue of fathering. And so this is a film that is going to it's going to come out in September. It's about 4 police officers who are doing a great job at work on the beat, but they're missing the boat at home as dads. And there's some tragedy in their lives that causes them, oh my goodness, we got volume in 2 places. There's some tragedy that occurs that causes them to begin to say, how can I really be a godly man and be a godly father? And so I've got some copies of this. I can give one to each church. This is a resource DVD that has a Father's Day kit in it for some things you could do on Father's Day to point people to Courageous. It's got information about how to do a men's breakfast. Now, there are some very specific instructions that are presented here about how to do the breakfast. It's only an hour and 15 minutes. It's action-packed, and it's done. You get guys out of there. So that would be an option for you. I want to show you a couple of clips here. I'm going to show you the theatrical trailer. Let's see. Okay.
Sheriff's office. We have a warrant for your arrest. Back door, back door! Thompson has now survived his rookie year.
Guess that means you can start using real bullets now. When you get married, have some kids, you're going to figure out real quick how much you don't know.
I love that line.
Emily's piano recital.
Can I talk to you?
Can I suggest that you spend a little more time with him?
All he wants to do is play video games and go run 5 miles.
What are you doing home?
They let me go. Do you really feel like you messed up your childhood not having a dad? More than you know. Adam, I need you to come with me right now. Man, if it weren't for my family, then I'd be in a tailspin right now. You do heal, but you're never the same. I want to know what God expects of me. I've been doing about half of what I should have been doing as a dad.
You're being too hard on yourself.
Resolution?
Yeah, you've been a good enough father.
I want to be a good enough father. Can I say this too? I don't feel like I started well. I want to finish well.
You're gonna do this? You're gonna do it right. Something like this needs ceremony.
I feel like a rich man. As your father, I want the very best for you. I promise to take care of you.
So where are you, men of courage? I believe every father should step up and answer the call. And to say, I will. I will.
This is absolutely the most phenomenal resource that you will have in your arsenal in the next 6 months. Well, in the next year. It's in theaters on September 30th. We're going to need to get people to the theaters so that it makes a bunch of noise. There's a screening in Midlothian on May the 3rd that I will be the host for. So I'll get to see some of you hopefully there. And if you have not responded to that, then I'll get the word, we'll get the word out broadly to you. There's some other screenings. I know there's one at Highland Heights in Lynchburg later on. Ralph, right? Got to see the whole film in Chesapeake. I got to host a screening there. Was it worth seeing? The emotional moments make every man cry. The funny moments make every man laugh. The security guard, I asked him what he thought about it, and he said, man, I got boogers all over my sleeve where I was crying during that thing. And he's just there to guard the film for Sony. And so it's amazing. So I'm going to show you the opening scene, which is critical. And when I do that, guys, I know I've got many of your information, but if you would at least, if I've got all your contact information, just put your name on this to say that you were in this men's ministry thing. If I don't have your contact information, then fill this out completely for me and give them back to me. But here's the opening scene from Courageous. And I don't know if I can turn off part of the lights here or not.
I'm not worried about the car.
Baby in the car. Yeah, I think it's his dad is with him. Yeah, I think he's all right.
Had the privilege of being able to talk with Stephen Kendrick through the process of writing this, and one of the reasons that this scene is in the movie and it starts the movie is because of the metaphor that it is for fatherhood. And he said that they see that in our culture, too many men have let go of the wheel for their family. Oh my goodness, you ain't even close, brother. But the good news is that right after you cry, you get to laugh real good. And it all kind of balances out. You get a chance to blow your nose. I'm going to tell you, it's a powerful film, and guys will walk out of there wanting to be better dads. And so the challenge for the church between now and then is to figure out how am I going to be ready to help them. And not just how am I going to be ready to help the men in my church, but how am I going to be ready to help the men outside the church who are going to see this and say, I think the church should have some help for me. Guys, it's a huge job, but it gets me fired up because I'm excited about what God does in a family when He gets a hold of a man. Father, thank you for the blessing of being able to spend some time with these men. I thank you for what's already happening this day. I pray your blessings on the remainder of the day as these guys go and eat lunch and process and discuss. I pray that you would just pour yourself out on them. But Father, would you inspire and encourage and direct them to think about deeply what you might be saying to them about how to reach and build men in their church and community. God, use us as your instruments to call other men to yourself. I've got a friend who signs off his emails that says, men chase after men who chase after Christ. So let us be men who chase after you. In Jesus' name, amen. I trust you've been challenged and motivated to take bold steps of faith to advance the kingdom. We are thankful for the help and support we received on these recordings from Morris Audio Consulting. Visit them on the web at morrisaudioconsulting.com. We also hope you'll take time to learn more about Noble Warriors and the Iron Sharpens Iron Conference Network by visiting noblewarriors.org. God bless you, friend.